My wife and I are colleagues at the hospital. We've been married for 5 years but have never made our relationship public. The most outrageous part is that she never allows our son to call her mom because our marriage began as a result of a drunken mistake. She got pregnant and had to marry me, and she resents me deeply. Later, when colleagues came over for a dinner party, she forced me to take our child to stay at a hotel. I thought my tolerance would earn her genuine affection, but when I returned home the next day, I caught her one true love coming out of the bedroom in pajamas. Victoria brought Ethan to me at Jackson Central Hospital. She said, "Ethan is the new cardiologist. Please show him around." Looking at her businesslike demeanor, it was hard to believe that the woman in front of me was my wife of 5 years. But recalling the email I received last night, I suppressed my heartache and agreed. All right. After familiarizing Ethan with the hospital, I went to the director's office alone. I said, "Director, I will be going to Harvard Medical School next month for further studies. Here is my resignation." After submitting my resignation, I walked out of the director's office and saw Victoria hurrying towards me in her white coat. My steps stopped abruptly, and I was momentarily stunned. Victoria is the youngest associate chief surgeon in the cardiothoracic department. Talented and beautiful, she is admired by many in the hospital. As her junior, I've had a crush on her for years. At our university alumni reunion in our second year after graduation, we had a passionate and confusing night, resulting in our son, Charlie, and leading to our marriage. I thought marriage would warm her cold heart, but an ice queen remains an ice queen. Victoria didn't let me make our marriage public, and even made Charlie call her aunt in public. Seeing her now, I instinctively called out, "Sophie." However, Victoria's brows furrowed and she coldly responded, "Dr. Stephen." Such a polite and distant address seemed to remind me that it was working hours and we were just colleagues. My heart ached for a moment. I wanted to mention my resignation, but she walked past me briskly, heading towards someone behind me. Turning around, I saw Ethan in a white coat, holding a medical record, smiling at her by the elevator. I gave a self-mocking smile. Ethan was Victoria's university classmate. After graduation, he went abroad for further studies and returned 2 months ago, joining our hospital. Back then, they were always together, and Victoria, who always had a cold demeanor towards others, was somewhat gentle with him. Even now, as my wife and the mother of my child, she remains the same. I saw Victoria say something to Ethan, her expression softening, showing a hint of gentleness. She even thoughtfully held the elevator door for him. I looked down, suppressing the bitterness in my heart. Such a gentle and considerate Victoria was something I had never seen. Since her heart couldn't be warmed, I decided to let it go. I would divorce her and set her free. With no surgeries today, I left work on time and picked up Charlie from kindergarten. "Dad!" Charlie's eyes lit up when he saw me, running into my arms. "You finished work so early today." His smile was infectious, and I responded with a smile. "Did you really want to see Dad that much?" Charlie nodded vigorously. "Of course. I want Dad to come and pick me up early every day." Looking into his clear eyes, I felt a lump in my throat, unable to make a promise. Finally, I just patted his head and said, "Dad will try to come early every day." "Okay," he replied. Seeing Charlie so happy with just a promise filled me with guilt. My loveless marriage with Victoria had made Charlie suffer along with me. In the next moment, my resolve strengthened. In a month, I would leave with Charlie. From now on, I would give him all my love and ensure he grows up happy and healthy. Returning to our apartment complex with Charlie, I saw Ethan and Victoria moving in downstairs. I instinctively wanted to leave, but Ethan noticed me first, greeting me with a smile. "Dr. Stephen, do you live in this complex too? Looks like Sophie found a great place for me. We both live here." I was stunned for a moment and glanced at Victoria, whose expression was calm. My heart couldn't help but ache. I remembered when we were buying our marital home, Victoria found it troublesome and refused to look at houses, leaving me to search and settle on this complex alone. Now, she was personally helping Ethan with his rental. Forcing a polite smile, I wanted to leave with Charlie, but Ethan looked at Charlie, surprised, and said, "Dr. Stephen, you're younger than me, yet you already have such a big child." He ruffled Charlie's hair and asked casually, "What does the mother do?" Victoria's expression tightened at his casual question, looking at me with a heavy gaze, almost showing a hint of warning. Meeting her eyes, my heart turned cold. I paused for a moment and then smiled at Ethan. "She's a doctor like Dr. Sophie in cardiothoracic surgery." Victoria's expression briefly tightened before returning to normal, but I didn't miss the flash of darkness in her eyes, filling me with a sense of suffocation. Was Victoria so afraid of Ethan knowing she was married with a child? I might have wanted everyone to know about my relationship with Sophia, but now I've decided to leave it behind. There's no need to expose it anymore. Seeing Ethan's surprised eyes, I added, "Charlie's mother works out of state and rarely comes back." Ethan nodded, his shock fading, and smiled. What a coincidence. He then bent down to greet Charlie, saying, "Hello, Charlie, Before he could finish, Sophia timely interrupted, "The movers have almost finished. We should go check." I knew she was afraid of saying something in front of Charlie and wanted to get Ethan away. Seeing Charlie's confused expression, my heart ached, but I could only suppress the pain and tighten my grip on Charlie's hand. "Well, you all keep busy, we won't disturb you," I said. Then I turned and left with Charlie. That night, after Charlie had fallen asleep, I was still waiting for Sophia to return. I sat at the table, looking at the divorce papers, feeling a mix of emotions but no reluctance. This marriage was a mistake born of a moment's impulse. Now, divorcing would be cutting losses in time. Just as I was lost in thought, I heard a noise at the door. Sophia walked into the living room, her charming face illuminated by her phone screen, a faint smile on her lips. She didn't even glance at me, completely absorbed in typing on her phone. Seeing her like that, my heart felt like it was submerged in cold water. Sophia rarely used her phone, let alone chatted so engrossedly. I didn't need to guess who she was talking to. As she was about to enter the bedroom, I snapped back to reality and called her, "Sophia, I need to talk to you." She stopped and looked at me with indifferent eyes, asking, "What is it?" Ignoring her cold expression, I said, "Let's get a divorce." I looked at her intently, speaking seriously. Sophia didn't even frown, rejecting without hesitation, "No way." I was stunned by her response, momentarily at a loss for words. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked into the bedroom, ending the conversation with, "I won't let my child grow up in a single-parent family." Watching her determined back, I found it laughable. Charlie wasn't even allowed to call her mom in front of others. How was it any different from being in a single-parent family? The divorce discussion ended in failure. I could only keep the divorce papers, waiting for another chance to get her signature. The next morning, after dropping Charlie off at kindergarten, I headed to the hospital. Even with less than a month left before I leave, I had to fulfill my duties. As soon as I arrived, a nurse stopped me, saying, "Dr. Stephen, please wait a bit to do your rounds. Mr. Lee is arguing with his son. You might get caught in the crossfire." I paused, remembering hearing that Mr. Lee's son had a gambling problem, squandered the family fortune, and now wanted his father's treatment money. Whenever the son came, Mr. Lee would be upset for half the day, but he was already old and had hypertension and coronary heart disease. He couldn't afford the anger. Worried, I decided to intervene. As I approached the room, I heard something shattering. Startled, I quickly pushed the door open, only to see Sophia shielding Ethan, glass shards on the floor. She was gently comforting Ethan, ignoring the bleeding cut on her arm. My heart pounded with anxiety. I called security to remove Mr. Lee's son and checked Mr. Lee's condition. Just as I was about to fetch alcohol and gauze, I saw Ethan tending to her wound with a gentle touch and concern in his eyes, saying, "Does it hurt?" "You didn't need to shield me, I could have dodged." Sophia shook her head softly, saying, "It's okay, as long as you're not hurt." I paused, watching their tender interaction, feeling my earlier thoughts were foolish. I turned to leave, overhearing the nurses chatting. "I've never seen Dr. Ethan care so much about someone. They really make a great pair." Their words felt like mockery of my past marriage. I stopped in my tracks, frozen. No one knew Sophia was my wife. Instead, they praised her pairing with another man. Preparing to leave without a word, a nurse noticed me and asked, "Dr. Stephen, you saw it too, right? Don't they make a great couple?" Facing everyone's gaze, I forced a smile. "Yes, they do." Just then, Ethan's voice came. "What great couple? What are you talking about?" Looking over, they had finished bandaging and were walking over. I wanted to change the subject, but the nurse spoke first, teasing, "Dr. Ethan, we all think you and Dr. Sophie make a perfect couple, a match made in heaven." Sophia's eyes dimmed, her brow furrowing. Ethan was taken aback, hurriedly waving his hands. "You misunderstood. Sophie and I are not." Sophia coldly interrupted, looking at me with reproach. "Instead of discussing others' privacy, why aren't you calming the patients to prevent similar incidents?" Her words were harsh and unyielding. Everyone's expressions changed, and the atmosphere turned awkward. I was speechless. She didn't care about these things. She just didn't want people gossiping about Ethan. I almost immediately understood her intent, but seeing the way my colleagues looked at me, I calmly asked, "Dr. Sophie, are you defending Dr. Ethan because you have feelings for him?" Did I hit the nail on the head? As soon as I said it, I saw Sophia's face change, and Ethan looked anxious, quickly denying, No, we're just classmates." I nodded and said, "Just kidding, don't mind me." Finishing my sentence, I excused myself, saying I had patient records to write, and hurriedly left. It wasn't until I returned to my office and closed the door that I finally relaxed and sighed softly. I recalled the dim look on Sophia's face when Ethan said they were just classmates. It turned out that for all these years, I wasn't the only one who loved in vain, but thinking about my upcoming overseas training, I regained my spirits. Luckily, I had decided to leave this melodramatic scene behind. I was the first to exit. In the afternoon, I took the divorce report to find Sophia. I knocked and entered only to see her watering a potted plant on her desk, her expression focused and serious, as if it were a delicate surgery rather than tending to a plant. I halted, momentarily stunned. Wasn't Sophia the one who disliked plants for attracting bugs and didn't let Charlie keep succulents? Why now? I frowned and saw a little tag on the plant with the word "than" written on it. No wonder she was so attentive. It was a gift from Ethan. I was speechless. I flipped to the last page of the divorce agreement where the signature was needed and handed it to her. "Sign this," I said. Before I could finish, her phone rang. I caught a glimpse of "than" on the screen before she picked up. Ethan's voice came through. "Sophie, there's a difficult patient here. Can you come help?" A look of urgency flashed in Sophia's eyes. She immediately stood up, saying, "Wait, I'll be right there." She didn't hang up the phone, took the document from me without even looking at it, and signed it. She hurriedly left, still trying to calm the flustered Ethan on the other end. I watched her quickly disappear and then looked at her delicate signature on the divorce agreement. All sorts of emotions turned into a sigh of relief. It was truly over between us. In the following days, I continued working, taking care of Charlie while looking for a short-term rental. After all, since we were divorced, I needed to move out. The day I finalized the rental and planned to move, Sophia unexpectedly knocked on my office door. "Do you have a moment?" she asked. I was puzzled. Sophia rarely came to my office to avoid suspicion, even for work matters. She always had me go to her office. Why now? "What's the matter?" I asked, looking at her. Sophia closed the door behind her and calmly said, "Our colleagues are coming over to celebrate tonight. You should leave work early, pack up, and take Charlie to stay somewhere else for the night." I was momentarily stunned. So she had come just to drive us out. But that was my home too. Why should we hide away just to maintain her single image? Were we so disgraceful? I looked at her, but all I saw was her usual cold indifference. The word stuck in my throat, ultimately turning into a simple, "Got it." I was planning to move out today anyway. I didn't want to argue. My voice carried a hint of finality. "I'll pack up and take Charlie away without disturbing you," I said, then continued to look at my patient records, ignoring her. Sophia frowned slightly, sensing something odd. She opened her mouth as if to ask something, but remembering that Ethan was waiting for her, she suppressed the feeling, nodded, and left. That evening I left work early, picked up Charlie from kindergarten, and on the way back I held his hand and said, "Charlie, pack your things later. We're going to stay somewhere else tonight, okay?" Charlie stopped, looked at me for a while, and suddenly asked, "Dad, are you and Mom getting a divorce?" I was taken aback. Squatting to meet his eyes, I asked, "Why do you ask that, Charlie?" Charlie replied honestly, "Our classmate's mom doesn't live with his dad. The teacher said that's called a divorce." He tilted his head, looking at me with clear eyes. "Dad, are you and Mom getting a divorce? And is that why you want to take me somewhere else?" I hadn't expected a child to be so perceptive. My heart trembled. I hesitated for a while, carefully choosing my words. "If Dad and Mom got a divorce, would you be sad?" Charlie's baby face scrunched up, and without thinking, he nodded. "Yes." My heart sank, filled with guilt. I had only thought about leaving and hadn't considered Charlie's feelings. While I was lost in thought, Charlie's innocent voice cut through. "Because if you get a divorce, Dad will be sad. If Dad isn't sad, then I won't be sad." His words, like a warm spring sun, dispelled my guilt, filling me with relief. My eyes welled up, and I couldn't help but hug Charlie tightly. Choking back my tears, I said, "Dad won't be sad as long as Charlie is here. Dad will never be sad." Charlie reached out to hug me and said, "I only want Dad. She doesn't even let me call her Mom. I don't want her." My heart ached, realizing I hadn't been a good father before. But feeling the warm, soft little body in my arms and knowing that in just over 10 days we could leave this place, I felt a sense of comfort. So I picked Charlie up, smiled, and said, "All right, let's pack our things and leave this place for our new home." Charlie hugged my neck and nodded happily. "Yay, we're going to our new home." The two of us packed our things and moved to the newly rented house. Just as we arrived, I received a call from a colleague. "Stephen, everyone is having a gathering at Dr. Ethan's place. Why aren't you here yet?" The other end of the call was bustling with noise. I paused, about to decline, when I heard Ethan's playful voice on the phone. He said, "Sophie, I lost the game, and they want me to find someone to drink with." Before he could finish, Sophia's anxious voice cut in, "I'll drink with you." The noise on the other end grew louder. I was stunned into silence, unable to say a word. Sophia had eagerly agreed to Ethan's request for a drink, not even waiting for him to finish his sentence. Was she afraid he would find someone else, or had she been waiting for this drink for many years? My thoughts were tangled until my colleague spoke again. "Stephen, are you still listening? I'll send you the address." I snapped back to reality and said dryly, "I have something to do at home. You all have fun." I hung up the phone, and my reflection on the darkened screen showed a face full of bitterness. I sighed silently. Sophia and Ethan were having so much fun together. Why should I go and make myself feel worse? The next day I went to work as usual. Unexpectedly, on the way to drop Charlie off at kindergarten, we got stuck in traffic and I had to take a detour. I arrived at the hospital a few minutes later than usual. After clocking in, I was about to change clothes for a meeting when I ran into Sophia and Ethan. Sophia saw me still in my casual clothes, looking flustered, and frowned, immediately scolding, "Why haven't you changed? Being on time is one thing, but we have a big meeting today. Don't you know to come early?" Seeing her reminded me of the previous night, and I felt stifled. I casually explained, "I was taking my child to school. There was traffic." Saying that, I moved to change my clothes, but Sophia's frown deepened, and her voice grew colder. "The child is not an excuse. It's your poor time management. If you had planned better, you wouldn't be cutting it so close." I paused, her righteous words igniting my frustration from the previous night. I had always personally taken Charlie to school, even if I had a late surgery. Sophia had never helped. What right did she have to criticize me? I met her stern gaze and asked, "Dr. Sophie, are you instructing me on my work? I wasn't late, and even if I were, what does that have to do with you?" Sophia's face darkened, and the atmosphere grew tense. Sensing the situation, Ethan quickly tried to smooth things over with a warm smile. "Stephen, Sophie is just concerned about how hard it is for you to take care of a child alone. Don't take it to heart." Still angry, I found his familiar tone unbearably irritating and retorted, "If Dr. Ethan and Dr. Sophie are so close, why don't you both move to the cardiac surgery department? Why bother with cardiology?" Without waiting for their reaction, I turned and left to change for the meeting. The meeting was primarily about discussing the surgery for a new patient with dilated cardiomyopathy, requiring collaboration between the cardiology and cardiac surgery departments. The head of surgery was already confirmed to be Sophia. The chief looked at me and asked, "Who does the cardiology department recommend, Stephen?" I hesitated, looking at the young doctors under me, and decided to take on the surgery myself. I was leaving soon, and doing one more surgery to pass on some experience would be good. So I told the chief, "I'll do it." The chief, understanding my intention, nodded, and was about to announce it when Sophia's cold voice interrupted. "No." Startled, I looked at her, and she icily said, "I don't believe someone who barely makes it to work on time can be meticulous in surgery. I don't agree with sincere participating." Her words sent a shiver through me. I had been a doctor for many years and had never made a mistake in surgery. Sophia knew that. How could she deny me over this? My eyes darkened, and I was about to argue when Sophia added, "I recommend Ethan as my assistant." Her tone was soft, and her eyes were filled with affection as she looked at Ethan. My chest tightened, and I couldn't speak. I realized Sophia didn't genuinely care about my mistake. She simply wanted to give Ethan an opportunity. Feeling the inquisitive gazes from those around me, I understood she was willing to step on me to give Ethan a boost. The director hesitated for a moment but still agreed to Sophia's request. After the meeting, the director asked me to stay behind alone. He said, "I know you mean well and want to give them another demonstration, but ultimately, true knowledge comes from practice. How can they improve if they don't get on the operating table?" The director patted my shoulder and comforted me. "Since you're leaving, Ethan is the most qualified to take over. You should give him a chance." I knew the director was right. Ethan had a solid theoretical foundation and extensive clinical experience abroad, but he had just returned and needed time to adjust. I sighed lightly and nodded, saying, "I understand." Following the director out of the meeting room, I ran into Sophia, who seemed to be waiting at the door on purpose. Seeing me and the director come out, she asked curiously, "What did the director say?" I was still thinking about what she said earlier and didn't want to answer, so I asked back, "Is there something you need?" Sophia had only asked casually and didn't mind not getting an answer. She softened her tone and said, "Sorry, I shouldn't have embarrassed you at the meeting earlier." I looked at her in surprise. Over the years, Sophia had always been cold to me. Even when there were conflicts, it was always me who apologized. Why today? In the next moment, I heard her low voice. "The collaboration was my idea. It has nothing to do with Ethan. Don't make it hard for him." Hearing this, I looked at Sophia in shock. So she only apologized to me because she was worried I would make things difficult for Ethan. My hand clenched in my sleeve, and my heart ached with bitterness. In Sophia's mind, was I really such a person who couldn't separate personal and professional matters and abused my power? My chest felt tight, and I moved my lips but couldn't say a word. Seeing this, Sophia thought I was still angry. She rubbed her temples and softened her tone even more, saying, "It's my fault. Don't be mad. I'll pick you and Charlie up tonight, okay?" Looking at her impatient expression and hearing her seemingly condescending words, I felt even more stifled, almost unable to breathe. I clenched my hand and directly said, "No need, we won't be coming back." Sophia frowned at my words, thinking I was just speaking out of anger. She subconsciously asked, "If you don't come home, where will you go?" Seeing her indifferent expression, I said, "That's your home, not." Before I could finish, Ethan rushed over and interrupted, "Sophie, I've been looking for you. An emergency case of congenital heart disease just came in. It's critical. Please go take a look." Sophia immediately agreed, leaving a quick "send me the address" before hurrying off. I watched her anxious figure disappear and sighed softly. I wouldn't tell Sophia the address. We were already divorced. That was Charlie's and my home, and it had nothing to do with Sophia. In the following days, the cardiology department was so busy that Sophia practically slept at the hospital. She never mentioned us coming back again, and I was relieved not to have to explain. I went to work and picked up Charlie on time every day, living a peaceful and comfortable life. With 10 days left before my departure, I was packing Charlie's things when I suddenly realized I had left my passport at the old house. Since it was a day off, I decided to take Charlie back to get it. But as soon as I opened the door, I saw several pairs of men's shoes on the shoe rack and men's coats on the hanger. A bad feeling washed over me. The next second, I saw the bedroom door open, and Ethan, in pajamas, walked out groggily. Seeing us at the door, he hesitated and asked, "Dr. Stephen, what are you doing here?" I was speechless. Seeing Ethan acting like the owner of the house, my hands subconsciously clenched. I quickly came to my senses, forced a smile, and explained, "Dr. Sophie asked me to get something for her." Without waiting for a response, I went straight to the drawer under the coffee table, grabbed my passport, and was about to leave with Charlie. Ethan stopped me, his voice filled with concern. "Dr. Stephen, Sophie and I cut him off. "Don't worry, Dr. Ethan. I won't say anything at the hospital." With that, I walked out the door, taking a deep breath as I reached the bottom of the stairs. So that's why Sophia hadn't mentioned us coming back. It wasn't because she was too busy with hospital work and forgot, but because our departure was exactly what she wanted. I clenched my hand unconsciously until Charlie, feeling the pain, began to struggle. I quickly loosened my grip, squatted down, and apologized. "Sorry, Charlie. Dad was lost in thought and didn't mean it." Charlie shook his head, looking at me with wide eyes. He asked, "Dad, is that man Mom's boyfriend? Is he going to be my new dad?" Hearing his innocent words, my heart ached sharply. Forcing a smile, I said, "Why would Charlie think that?" Charlie lowered his head, looking hurt, and said, "Leah's new mom lives with her and her dad. Sometimes she even picks her up from school." He frowned and threw himself into my arms, hugging me tightly. His voice was fragile. "I don't want that man. I only want you, Dad." His pure words made my heart ache and warm at the same time. My throat tightened, and my voice trembled as I slowly hugged the soft little boy in my arms. "Don't worry, Charlie. There's no new dad. It's just us." I gently patted Charlie's head, my movements soft. I was comforting both him and my own trembling heart as it gradually grew firm. Tomorrow, I would go to the director and apply to leave early. The cooling-off period for the divorce was over. I got the divorce certificate. There's no reason for me to stay in this city any longer. Early the next morning, I knocked on the door of the dean's office. I said, "Dean, I am applying to resign today and will be leaving early for the United States." The dean saw the determination in my eyes and didn't try to stop me. He just said, "There is a surgery scheduled today for a patient with dilated cardiomyopathy. If you have time, please keep an eye on it for me." I was taken aback for a moment, remembering how Sophie had embarrassed me in the meeting back then. My first instinct was to refuse, but this was Than's first surgery, and I was concerned about the patient's safety. So, I didn't hesitate any longer and changed into my scrubs, heading into the observation room. I watched Than's skillful movements, constantly monitoring the heart rate and providing updates on the patient's condition. I breathed a sigh of relief. Than's skills were indeed impressive. After my departure, he could definitely carry the banner for the cardiology department. Only after my anxiety eased did I notice the seamless cooperation between Sophie and Than. It was as if the years that had been away were just a mirage. They were as close as they had been in school, understanding each other with just a glance. I paused for a moment. In the past, I would have felt a pang of bitterness, but now I just silently looked away. After accidentally seeing them move into Sophie's house yesterday, I had already stopped caring. After all, I was leaving. What did it matter to me how Sophie and Than were? After the surgery, I left first, changed clothes, and was about to go back to my office to pack. "Stephen," a familiar voice called out, making me stop. I turned to see Sophie with a furrowed brow and a low inquiry. "Did you go home yesterday?" Listening to her accusatory tone, I suddenly found it amusing. I had lived there for 5 years. Did I need to report to her if I went back? But I couldn't be bothered to engage with her further, so I swallowed the sharp words and nodded casually. "Yeah, I went to get some things." My indifferent response made Sophie frown even more, and a strange feeling arose in my heart. In the past, if I saw someone else in the house, I would have been furious and confronted her. Why was I so calm now? But she only hesitated for a moment before explaining, "Than's home is undergoing plumbing repairs, so I let him stay at my place temporarily." I saw her eyes flicker, thinking how fake that sounded. If it was just temporary, why not stay in the guest room instead of the master bedroom? I lowered my eyes and chuckled lightly, about to speak when I heard then urging, "Sophie, the post-op meeting is starting. Hurry up." Sophie was immediately distracted, nodded in agreement, and didn't care what I wanted to say. She simply instructed, "You and Charlie can stay for 3 more days. Then we'll move out then, and I'll bring you back." Without waiting for my response, she hurried into the meeting room. I watched her figure disappear down the hallway, took a long breath to release the pent-up air in my chest. Sophie wouldn't be able to find us. I had already rescheduled the flight, and tomorrow we would be on our way to Boston, USA. I retracted my gaze and walked back to my office to pack, without any nostalgia. Many familiar doctors and nurses were surprised to hear that I was leaving. They asked, "Why so sudden? Going to study in the US just like that without any hint?" I saw their puzzled looks and casually said, "Charlie's mom is on a business trip in the US, and I want to further my studies. So, I'm going along. We can't have the child always separated from his mom." They nodded in understanding, saying, "Indeed, for the sake of the child, there's no other way." I smiled and changed the topic. "This pot of succulents is for the head nurse. The workload is heavy, and looking at something cute can help relieve stress. These banners can stay in the department as encouragement for future doctors to remember their mission and live up to the expectations of patients and their families." I distributed the items I couldn't take with me to my colleagues. Finally, I looked at the pen on my desk, hesitating for a rare moment. This was a gift from Sophie. Sophie was always cold and indifferent, rarely celebrating holidays, let alone anniversaries. This pen was a gift from Sophie when I joined the Boston Central Hospital. I had always treasured it and used it carefully. But now, looking at the pen, I suppressed the sour feeling in my heart and, without hesitation, gave it to the head nurse, asking her to pass it on to Sophie. I said, "This is my parting gift to her, to thank her for the years of working together. I wish her all the best in the future." After saying goodbye to my colleagues, I packed my luggage with Charlie and called a courier to deliver the divorce certificate to Sophie's house. By the time I finished everything, it was late at night. Charlie slept soundly, but I couldn't fall asleep. I sat on the balcony, looking at the pitch-black night, scrolling through my chat history with Sophie. I hadn't noticed before, but now I realized the chat box was mostly filled with my monologues. I chuckled softly, not feeling too sad, just pausing for a moment before decisively deleting Sophie's contact information. A farewell needed to be complete. Now, with no more attachments, I could leave with ease. By the time daylight broke, Charlie and I were already on a plane to the United States. Charlie stared out the window at the blue sky and white clouds for a long time before turning back to ask, "Dad, are we in the sky?" I smiled, looking at his innocent face, and nodded. "Yes, we are flying to America. Starting a new life, Charlie. Are you happy?" The little boy, no bigger than a bean, nodded without hesitation, his bright eyes sparkling as he said, "Happy. As long as I'm with Dad, I'm happy." I looked at his innocent smile, couldn't help but touch his head, and said softly, "Dad too. As long as I'm with Charlie, Dad is happy." As soon as I finished speaking, the plane broke through the clouds and the dazzling sunlight immediately filled the cabin. I felt the warmth of the sunlight, and it seemed to fill me with strength, as if all the confusion and pain ended at this moment. The future looked bright. On the other side, Sophie had just stepped off the operating table and returned to her office. There were several missed calls on her phone. She hesitated for a moment, just about to call back when Ethan knocked on the door. He said, "Sophie, thank you for letting me stay these past few days. The house was repaired ahead of schedule and I moved out this afternoon. You no longer have to sleep in the office and can go home for a good rest." He smiled brightly, pulling a potted succulent from behind him and placing it on Sophie's desk. "Here, a thank you gift for you." Sophie pursed her lips, instinctively wanting to refuse, but looking at the small, delicate succulent, she inexplicably thought of Charlie. Did she mention that Charlie liked succulents? Sophie hesitated for a moment, but accepted it, saying, "I'll take this. You can take back those other plants you entrusted me with." She gestured to the office's mismatched green plants. Ethan had almost killed those plants and had asked her, who had taken a plant protection course in college, to care for them. Sophie had righteously refused, saying, "I'm a doctor for people, not plants." Yet, while making rounds, she found several sickly potted plants in her office. Ethan had even hung a sign saying, "Please, Dr. Sophie, bring them back to life." She sighed and could only accept them, spending nearly a month nursing them back to health. Seeing the now vibrant plants, Ethan's eyes lit up with joy. "Sophie, I knew I could trust you," he said, giving her a thumbs up. "Dr. Sophie, you truly have magical hands." He carefully picked up the plants and turned to leave. Just before walking out, he remembered something and turned back, saying, "By the way, you have a package that arrived this morning. I signed for it and left it on the coffee table." Sophie immediately thought of the missed calls. It was the courier, but she frowned the next second. She hadn't bought anything recently, and anything at home was purchased by me with my number on file. Why would they call her? Feeling puzzled and realizing it was time to leave work, Sophie changed clothes and dialed my number, intending to tell me she was bringing 2 people home today. But the only response was a cold, "The number you have dialed is currently switched off. Please try again later." Her heart sank. Our phones had to be on 24/7 in case of emergencies. Why was mine off? Growing increasingly concerned, Sophie hung up and went to my office, only to find it dark and locked. Several unusual occurrences finally made her frown deeply. Her heart trembled with a sudden unease. Passing by the nurse's station, she quickly called out to the head nurse, who had a good relationship with me. "Where's Dr. Stephen?" The next sentence rooted Sophie to the spot. The head nurse replied, "Dr. Stephen resigned. Didn't Dr. Sophie know?" A crack appeared on Sophie's usually cold face, a flicker of shock in her calm eyes. "When did this happen?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. The head nurse, seeing Sophie like this for the first time, was momentarily stunned before replying, "Just yesterday." As she spoke, she seemed to remember something, taking out a pen and said, "Dr. Stephen asked me to give you this pen as a farewell gift. He said it's a token of appreciation for working together all these years, and wished you the best in the future." Sophie stared at the familiar pen, dazed for a moment. It was the pen she had given me when I started. She still remembered how my eyes sparkled with a light she had never seen before, as I carefully held the pen and said, "Thank you. I will be a good doctor." Over the years, Sophie always thought of that sparkling gaze whenever she saw me using the pen, but now, hearing the head nurse's words, her heart clenched tightly. She murmured, "Wishing you the best." Sophie's eyes darkened, and she pressed her lips together. Given my recent strange behavior, it didn't take much to guess why I had said that. I thought she still had feelings for Ethan, so I resigned and left without a word. Anger surged through Sophie. How could I leave without discussing it with her? If I had just asked, she could have explained everything. How did it come to this? Sophie was filled with anger, like a dormant volcano ready to erupt at any moment. The head nurse, frightened, stepped back silently, unsure why Sophie was so furious. Just as she was about to speak, Sophie asked, "Did Dr. Stephen say where he was going?" The head nurse quickly nodded. "Dr. Stephen said his wife was going on a business trip to the U.S., and he was going with her." Wife. Her grip tightened, and she almost let out a derisive laugh. How could she not know she had to go to the U.S. for work? Sophia was so angry that she nearly forgot she had said she didn't want their colleagues to know they were married. She closed her eyes to suppress the chilling coldness and temporarily held back her anger at my sudden departure. She turned around and went home. It was just a moment of impulsive decision to go to the U.S. She would come back in a few days once her anger subsided. After all, we were already married. Even if I left, I would always come back. Thinking this, Sophia drove home. It seemed Ethan had hired a cleaning service before he left. The house was clean and tidy, almost like a new home. Under normal circumstances, she would have felt comfortable seeing such a minimalistic appearance. But now, a sudden feeling of emptiness emerged. It was as if she had lived alone in this house all along, without me or Charlie. Sophia frowned. Her anger had cooled down during the drive and she had regained her calm. But now, looking at the empty house, she felt a new wave of confusion. Rarely did she feel panic, and she couldn't help but think about taking a leave to personally go to the U.S. to find me and Charlie. With this thought, Sophia walked to the coffee table, took out a bag containing her documents, and prepared to get her passport. But as soon as she took out the bag, she saw 2 documents inside. One was an admission letter from Harvard Medical School, written in English. The other was a divorce agreement, written in Chinese. Sophia's heart sank to the bottom. She looked at the name Sincere in the student column and the 2 signed names on the agreement. She stood there in a daze for a while before letting out a bitter, self-deprecating smile. I wasn't just going abroad to relax. I was going to study. I had even deceived her into signing the divorce agreement, with no intention of coming back. If she wasn't mistaken, that envelope was also sent by me, containing the divorce certificate. Sophia's hands trembled as she opened it. Sure enough, everything was as she had expected. Looking at the documents and certificates on the table, Sophia felt as if her heart was being swept by a cold wind, numb with pain. Sincere had just left like that. Sophia laughed bitterly, covering her face with her hands. All her emotions were hidden in a long sigh. She murmured, "Sincere." Her bitter voice echoed in the empty house, destined to receive no answer. I knew nothing of Sophia's pain, regret, and struggle. At that moment, I was at the San Francisco airport, waiting for a connecting flight. Charlie, being young and on his first international flight, was extremely uncomfortable after the long journey. His little face was scrunched up, making me feel both heartache and relief that I had booked business class for the entire trip. If we had been in economy class, which is smaller and more cramped, he would have been even more uncomfortable. During the few hours of our layover, I took Charlie to the hamburger place he had always wanted to try. The place was packed, and there were almost no empty seats. I looked around and found a vacant spot in a corner. Despite the fact that a child was already sitting there, I approached with the hope of asking if we could share the table. "Excuse me, may we sit here?" I began, but before I could finish, the child looked up. That's when I saw her golden hair and amber eyes beneath her hood. The girl had fair skin and striking features, almost as if she were of mixed heritage. I was taken aback, thinking the seat must belong to her family. Just as I was about to apologize and leave, the girl glanced at me and nodded indifferently. I quickly thanked her and took a seat with Charlie. Though the girl seemed distant, she was actually quite accommodating. This thought flashed through my mind but was soon forgotten as I focused on ordering for Charlie and helping him eat. Watching him enjoy his hamburger and regain his usual energy, I finally felt a sense of relief. The bumpy journey had been tough on Charlie, and now that he felt better, my guilt eased a bit. I wiped the ketchup off his face before turning to my own meal, only to find the girl across from me staring. "What's wrong?" I asked, meeting her gaze. She shook her head and didn't answer, just wiped her nose with a napkin and looked away. I didn't think much of it. Her eyes had shown a hint of sadness, not malice, more like nostalgia. I couldn't help but wonder if seeing me and Charlie reminded her of her own parents. Watching her sit alone in the bustling restaurant, so out of place, my heart softened. Since becoming a father, I had become particularly attentive to children. Just then, Charlie's sudden exclamation brought me back to reality. "Dad, look at the girl," he said. I looked up and saw the girl's face flushed, her brows furrowed, and her chest heaving as if she couldn't breathe. Asthma, I realized. My eyes widened as I saw her struggling to reach for her backpack on the luggage beside her. I immediately stood up, quickly opened her backpack and found her medication in less than 5 seconds. Watching her use the inhaler and gradually calm down, I finally relaxed. I asked Charlie to get a cup of water for her. "You should rinse your mouth after using the inhaler to prevent side effects," I advised. The girl looked at me intently, then nodded solemnly and took the cup. Seeing that she was all right and that Charlie had finished his hamburger, I decided it was time to leave for our next flight. Just as I was about to say goodbye, the girl grabbed my hand and wrote "Thank you" in my palm. I was taken aback. It wasn't just that I was shocked she couldn't speak, but even more so by the 2 Chinese characters she wrote. So she was Chinese. I clenched my hand, thinking about how I had just spoken to her in English, finding it amusing for some reason. I lowered my head with a chuckle and shook my head, saying, "It's okay, meeting is fate. Let's meet again if we're destined to." After saying that, I turned and left. I thought it was just a brief encounter, but fate works in mysterious ways. In the cabin, I saw the blonde girl again. The flight attendant asked me during boarding if I would mind having an unaccompanied minor sit next to me. If I did, they would arrange to change my seat. I shook my head, saying I didn't mind. The next moment, I saw the blonde girl walk into the cabin. She saw me. Her eyes brightened for a moment, and she nodded at me in greeting. Then, under the guidance of the flight attendant, she sat next to me. I smiled, thinking it was quite a coincidence. We had just eaten at the same table, and now we were sitting next to each other. As I marveled at the serendipity, Charlie tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Dad, is this the sister who is flying alone without her parents?" This was what I had just explained to Charlie about unaccompanied minors. Seeing him ask directly, I glanced at the blonde girl, relieved to find she didn't seem to hear, and said to Charlie, "Yes, she's flying alone. Isn't that impressive?" I didn't want Charlie to feel sorry for her and hurt her self-esteem, and besides, I didn't think flying alone was something to pity. I genuinely thought she was quite capable. Charlie nodded, looking at the girl with admiration and respect in his eyes. He said, "Yes, sister is really impressive." He rummaged through his little bag and took out a packet of his favorite candy, offering it to the blonde girl. "Sister, please have some candy," he said. Only those whom Charlie liked would receive his favorite candy. The blonde girl looked at the candy that suddenly appeared in front of her, then turned to look at Charlie. Meeting his sincere, bright eyes, she hesitated for a moment. I quietly watched the 2 children make friends, not stopping them. After a moment of hesitation, the blonde girl accepted the candy. Charlie immediately beamed and said, "Sister took my candy, so we are good friends now. You have to teach me how to fly by myself. I want to be as impressive as you." The girl listened to Charlie's words, lowered her eyelashes shyly. As Charlie wanted to say more, I worried his enthusiasm might bother her, and quickly intervened. "The plane is about to take off. Sit tight." The flight went by quickly. Not only did I look after Charlie, but I also kept an eye on the blonde girl. She was very well behaved, wearing headphones and writing or drawing in a notebook, looking very quiet. I was also worried about her asthma, but it didn't flare up. It wasn't until we smoothly arrived in Boston, which was already afternoon local time, that I felt relieved. After collecting our checked luggage and walking out the airport doors, I was about to turn and bid the girl farewell when I saw Charlie holding her hand tightly. He asked, "Sister, I still don't know your name." For some reason, Charlie was very attached to this girl. Just as I was about to tell Charlie to let go, the girl smiled, her previously cold demeanor melting like ice in the sun, revealing a bit of childish innocence. She squatted down and handed me a note. Worried Charlie wouldn't understand, she asked me to read it for her. "Isabella, I slowly read out the girl's name. It's a beautiful name, I nodded. Charlie repeated it, smiling as he held her hand. Then I'll call you Bella from now on. Before he could finish his sentence, a deep voice sounded, Bella. I froze for a moment, watching Isabella's steps pause and turn towards the voice. The person approaching was tall and slender, with delicate features and a gentle yet slightly aloof demeanor, much like Isabella. She gracefully walked over and gently took Isabella's luggage. The meeting ended just in time for me to pick you up. Glad I wasn't late. Isabella looked at her, showing a hint of childish innocence, and nodded. Seeing their similar faces and demeanor, I assumed she was Isabella's mother and felt reassured. I nodded, pulling Charlie to say goodbye. Bella's family is here to pick her up. Say goodbye to her. Charlie bit his lip, his eyes filled with reluctance. He looked at Isabella for a long time before finally saying, Goodbye, Bella. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then took out the notebook she had been writing and drawing in on the plane. She tore out 2 pages and handed them to Charlie. She then looked at the woman beside her and signed a few words in sign language, asking her to translate. The woman nodded. This is Bella's drawing of you and Charlie. Thank you for your help during the journey. I looked at the drawings in Charlie's hand. Though they were just a few strokes, they vividly captured our expressions, with a gentle touch that showed a good mood. I happily accepted them, saying, Thank you. I'll keep them well. Isabella nodded, signed a few more words, and looked at the woman. The woman said, Bella would like your contact information, if that's okay. Of course, I nodded. We just arrived, and it's rare to see Charlie like another kid so much. Naturally, I didn't want the kid to lose a good friend. Just as I was about to find some paper and a pen to write down my phone number and name, the woman handed me her phone. She said, Bella lives with me. You can save your number in my phone. I nodded. After saving my contact, I hesitated for a moment and then asked, May I have your number, Miss Victoria? The woman smiled at my polite address, instantly dissolving the sense of distance. She seemed as warm and gentle as a beautiful jade. No need for such formality. Just call me Victoria, she said. I looked at the business card she handed me. The description beneath her name made me pause. Did you graduate from Harvard Medical School? I asked. Victoria nodded, slightly surprised by my astonishment. Yes, why? She asked. I smiled, thinking how coincidental it all was. I'm a new student at the medical school, I said. We looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh. What a small world, she said, her eyes curving into a gentle smile. The indifference in her eyes disappeared like snow melting under the spring sun. Where are you headed? I can give you a ride, she offered. Isabella's eyebrows raised at this, and a thoughtful look flashed in her eyes. I was worried about causing trouble and was about to wave off the offer, but Charlie tugged at my clothes with his big pleading eyes. I want to spend more time with Bella, he said pitifully. I felt a bit embarrassed and was about to say something when Isabella took Charlie's hand and started walking, effectively blocking any refusal I might have had. Victoria smiled, reached for my luggage, and said, It's rare to see Bella so proactive. Come on, consider it a thank you for looking after her. I had no choice but to agree. As I looked at the orange-red sky outside the airport, some of the travel fatigue seemed to dissipate. The start of this new life wasn't as bad as I had feared. By the time we settled in at home, it was already evening. I was still mulling over the day's extraordinary events when Charlie tugged at my clothes again. Dad, I'm sleepy, he said. On the way home, I had let him play to his heart's content to help him adjust to the time difference. Sure enough, after dinner, he was already too sleepy to keep his eyes open. I quickly took him to wash up, made his bed, and tucked him in. Before falling asleep, he asked, Dad, when can I play with Bella again? I paused for a moment and then coaxed him. I'll message Bella tomorrow and see when we can meet up, okay? Charlie nodded, finally at ease, and fell into a deep sleep. Watching his peaceful face, I sighed lightly. I was actually quite anxious about bringing Charlie away from the environment he'd known for 5 years to this unfamiliar city. Would he adapt? Would he feel strange and nervous? But seeing how he handled the journey, though tired, he wasn't impatient or scared, and he even made a new friend. I felt a bit relieved. I gently tucked him in and kissed his forehead. "Don't worry, Charlie, Dad will take good care of you," I whispered. Just then, my phone lit up. It was a call from Sophia. Though only 2 days had passed, seeing her name felt like a century had gone by. My heart sank, and I decisively hung up and blocked her number. Since I had decided to cut ties, I shouldn't let her affect me anymore. The following days flowed by peacefully. I moved into a small house my parents had bought during their stay in the U.S. Though the decor was a bit dated, it was convenient, close to my school and Victoria's place, just 2 blocks away. Since we met at the airport, our interactions increased because of the bond between the 2 kids. I was worried about Charlie's language skills, even though he attended a bilingual preschool back home. Victoria suggested that Charlie join her for lessons at her place. That's when I learned that Isabella wasn't naturally mute, she just wouldn't speak due to trauma. Victoria said it was rare to see Isabella so eager to interact with someone, so she encouraged Charlie to visit and learn English. Naturally, I had no reason to refuse. Half a month into the semester, I was incredibly busy. If not for Victoria, I wouldn't know how to take care of Charlie. Sometimes, when I was late, she would wait for me with Charlie under the teaching building. Like now, as I walked out of the building, I was hugged by a little figure. "Dad!" Charlie shouted. He had grown taller and was wearing a fluffy hat with dog ears, looking like a little Samoyed. If he had a tail, it would have been wagging vigorously. "I came to pick you up," he said excitedly. Seeing his bright eyes, I couldn't help but smile. "Did you bother Aunt Victoria again?" Charlie's eyes twinkled mischievously, and he giggled. "Aunt Victoria said it's okay." I tapped his nose and turned to Victoria, who was watching us with a smile. "Sorry for the trouble, Professor Victoria," I said. Victoria's eyes curved as she shook her head, indicating it was no problem. "Let's go home. We can pick up Bella on the way," she said. I nodded, holding Charlie's hand as we walked side by side. I bought some beef. Bella really liked the beef stew I made last time, so I'll make it again tonight, I said. Charlie chimed in. "What about me? What about me? I want to eat an egg tart," Charlie said as Victoria patted his head. "I've already bought some. I'll bake them for you when we get home, okay?" He replied. "Okay!" Charlie cheered with joy. Watching Charlie's lively demeanor, I couldn't help but smile sincerely. Since leaving the oppressive atmosphere back home, Charlie had become more cheerful and outgoing. I felt warm in my heart, feeling that life was truly happy. Just then, I heard a very familiar hoarse voice calling out, "Sincere!" I hadn't expected to see Sophia again under such circumstances. She was dressed in a trench coat which made her appear somewhat thin, like a cold snowflake drifting into my life unexpectedly. I was stunned for a moment before coming back to my senses. Instinctively, I glanced down at Charlie. The laughter from earlier had frozen, and his pale face was now even paler. Charlie's tightly clenched hand reminded me that he was scared. My heart sank, and I immediately protected Charlie behind me, looking at Sophia with a hint of displeasure in my eyes. I asked, "What are you doing here?" The divorce was finalized, and she and Ethan could be together in peace. Why did she still need to show up in front of me without any warning, scaring Charlie? Sophia listened to my question but didn't react at all. No, she did react. All her attention was just focused on me and Victoria beside me. She said, "You came to the United States without telling me. Can't I come to find you?" Sophia's hand, hidden in her sleeves, was clenched tightly. Her gloomy gaze was fixed on Victoria and wouldn't move away. "We just got divorced and you found a new mom for Charlie so quickly? Or did you divorce me for this woman and then bring Charlie to the United States?" I didn't know the anger and thoughts swirling in Sophia's mind. I only found her words ridiculous and laughable. I said, "We're already divorced. Where I go has nothing to do with you." After saying that, I picked up Charlie, ready to leave. Victoria quietly followed behind us. But Sophia reached out and grabbed me. The word divorce seemed to touch her forbidden zone. Her calm demeanor couldn't be maintained, and her voice carried a bit of a choke. She said, "I didn't agree to the divorce. It was you." Before she could finish her sentence, I interrupted her mercilessly. "The agreement is signed, and the divorce certificate is obtained. Whether you agree or not doesn't matter." Sophia's heart trembled, unable to believe how the gentle and accommodating husband had turned into this cold and ruthless person. I didn't care about her thoughts and wanted to shake off her hand, but Sophia held on tightly, and since I was holding a child, I couldn't use much force and couldn't shake her off immediately. "Let go," I said angrily. I felt Charlie trembling with fear in my arms and was eager to find a safe place to comfort him, but Sophia wouldn't let go. Her eyes were cold, and her hand was like an iron clamp, gripping me tightly. She said, "I have something to say to you." Before she could finish, Charlie lunged forward and bit her wrist. He bit down hard, and Sophia, caught off guard, cried out and quickly let go. A row of red, swollen teeth marks appeared on her wrist. Charlie said, "Let go of my dad." Charlie, whether from anger or fear, was trembling in my arms. His eyes were red, almost on the verge of tears. He said, "You won't let me call you Mom, and now you want to find a new dad, making Dad so sad. You don't deserve to be my mom." The innocent child's voice echoed, making both Sophia and me freeze. I had always thought I hid my sadness well, but Charlie, so perceptive, had noticed it all and kept it in his heart. I felt a mix of bitterness and relief, quickly hugging Charlie tightly and gently patting his back, saying, "It's okay, it's okay. Charlie, don't cry." Sophia was surprised. A new dad? The next moment, Sophia quickly realized it was probably due to that time we ran into Ethan, causing a misunderstanding. Sophia frowned and, despite the pain in her wrist, wanted to explain. But I coldly looked at her and said, "Sophia, I don't want to see you again." With that, I carried Charlie and left. Sophia wanted to chase after us but was blocked by someone. A cold voice rang out, "Miss Sophia, Sincere said he doesn't want to see you." Sophia's heart sank as she turned to look at the woman who had been smiling gently earlier but now had cold eyes behind her glasses. Sophia said, "That's my husband and my son. You have no right to stop me." Victoria raised an eyebrow at her words and smiled, saying, "If I understand correctly, you're already divorced. Also," her smile didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold like the word she spoke. Charlie said it himself, "You don't deserve to be his mom." Victoria's malicious repetition was like a sharp blade, ruthlessly stabbing the softest part of Sophia's heart. Pain and anger spread simultaneously. Sophia immediately gritted her teeth and retorted, "And who are you to interfere in my affairs?" Her words came out through clenched teeth, full of resentment. Victoria seemed oblivious to her barely contained fury and continued to add fuel to the fire. "I'm not interfering in your affairs." Her voice was light, her gaze falling on me as I left with Charlie. The second half of her sentence didn't need to be said. Sophia understood immediately that it was for me. Sophia's heart sank even further, wanting to say something more, but Victoria glanced at her and left a final remark. "Miss Sophia, you should go back." He finished speaking and quickly caught up with me, leaving Sophia staring at our backs, feeling so frustrated and troubled, as if a rope was tightening around her neck, making it hard for her to breathe. That night, perhaps due to Sophia's sudden appearance, Charlie was frightened and stayed close to me, lacking his usual sense of security. Normally, he loved to stick to Isabella, always pestering her to draw or watch TV, but not today. He followed me home early. Victoria asked, "Was Charlie scared?" Her eyes were filled with concern as she looked at Charlie clinging tightly to me. She didn't ask much, just escorted us to the door and kindly said, "Let me know if you need any help. I'm always available." I gave a grateful smile and nodded. Once we got home and stepped through the door, I tried to put Charlie down, intending to say something, but he wouldn't let go of my clothes. He said nothing, just looked at me with those big, clear eyes, full of sincerity and affection, which melted my heart. The words I wanted to say got stuck in my throat at his earnest gaze. Seeing him so insecure, I realized that Sophia's appearance had indeed affected him a lot. Charlie was mature for his age. Even though he knew I was unhappy because of Sophia, he never said anything and just put up with it as long as I was happy. Understanding this made my heart ache even more. feeling deeply guilty for making him endure so much at such a young age. I sighed softly and asked, "Charlie, do you not like her?" I didn't mention who, but Charlie understood. He buried his soft face in my neck, his eyelashes trembling as he whispered, "No, I don't like her." I pressed, "Is it because she doesn't let you call me Dad?" Charlie's body trembled, and with a shaky voice he hugged me tighter and said, "If she comes, I have to leave. I don't want to leave, Dad." I was stunned for a moment by his words. I had never mentioned anything about sending him away. Why would he think that? Just as I was about to ask, Charlie started trembling more, his voice breaking as he said, "Yang Yang said that after a divorce, parents take turns having the kids. I don't want to go back. I don't want to leave Dad." Feeling his trembling body, I held him tighter and reassured him, "No, Charlie won't have to go anywhere." His sobbing voice felt like a sword piercing my heart, making me feel both sorrowful and helpless. I realized that Charlie's fear was rooted in this. Feeling the wetness on my neck, I gently pulled back and wiped away his tears. My hand softly patted his back in a comforting rhythm. I said, "Dad won't let her take you away, Charlie." My voice firm and unwavering, like an immovable mountain. It wasn't just a comfort, but a promise. "Charlie will always be with Dad," I whispered, and my words echoed in the room, stopping his tears and soothing my own heart. I gently wiped away the remaining tears from his face, my eyes clear and resolved. The next afternoon, I finished my class early and left Charlie with Victoria. I then unblocked Sophia's number and called her. "Do you have time? I want to talk." So in the park, under the clear blue sky dotted with white clouds, pigeons cooed and occasionally flapped their wings in the square. The withered leaves covered the grass, basking in the warm sunlight, creating a beautiful autumn scene. If not for me and Sophia sitting on the bench, it would have been a perfect picture. We sat with a natural distance between us, representing the unbridgeable gap that had formed over the years. The autumn wind swirled the fallen leaves between us before settling down. "You want to. I want to." We both started speaking at the same time, then stopped, exchanging glances before looking away. I noticed the bandage peeking out from her sleeve and asked, "Did Charlie bite you hard?" Charlie had quite the bite. I had only caught a glimpse that day, but the teeth marks were alarming. Now Sophia saw me looking at her wrist and hid it back in her sleeve, saying, "It's nothing." After a pause, she added, "Charlie was just venting his anger, I understand." Hearing this, I looked at her calm demeanor, feeling a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was surprised at her sudden understanding nature, and on the other, I felt cold. Sophia clearly didn't grasp why Charlie bit her. It wasn't out of anger but fear. I said, "Charlie bit you because he's scared." Seeing the confusion in her eyes, I continued, "He's afraid you'll take him away. Afraid he'll have to live with a new dad and never see me again." My explanation was clear, but it made Sophia frown. She asked, "What new dad?" "Then and I are just colleagues. He was just staying temporarily and has already moved out." Before she could finish, my cold laugh interrupted her. "Sophia, I'm not blind. I know you still have feelings for him. Do you think I don't see it?" My voice was laced with suppressed anger. After blurting this out, I clenched my hands to regain my composure. "You and I were secretly married. Charlie calls you aunt outside just to keep up the single persona, waiting to pursue you again when he returns, right? You even help him rent an apartment, grow plants, drink toasts with him, actively involve him in surgeries, and let him stay at your place." The more I speak, the calmer my voice becomes. I look at Sophia and ask coldly, "Can you honestly say you had no personal motives in all of this?" Sophia's eyebrows, which had been furrowed since the beginning, tightened even more. Meeting my icy gaze, she felt my calm statements were like swords of accusation, piercing her deeply. She instinctively wanted to explain, but the words caught in her throat. Sophia couldn't claim without guilt that she had no personal feelings for him. After all, she had indeed liked him back then, and had been depressed for a while after he left. But now, seeing him again, she felt nothing. Her heart was now full of me. She remembered the gentle, passionate, and considerate me who would wait for her to come home, secretly bring her meals, help iron her clothes, and remind her to take her vitamins. These considerate actions warmed her heart, which had been full of resentment over that drunken mistake. She was certain she had grown used to my presence and just needed a bit more time. Sophia looked at me, paused, and then said, "Yes, I did take extra care of him, but only because he was my classmate. I had no other thoughts. Those things are in the past. I know your feelings for me. Why can't you wait a little longer? Give me some time, and I will respond to you." Sophia had never been so desperate. She wanted to express her feelings, to make me understand her heart. But when she finished speaking, only the autumn wind blowing through the gap between us remained. I looked at Sophia's furrowed brows and the hidden anxiety in her eyes, feeling a bit amused. In the past, hearing Sophia's guilty confession and passionate declaration would have stirred some emotions in me. Now I felt nothing, as if watching a one-man show from outside the screen, unable to be moved. I had only one question. I asked, "Why should I wait for you?" I looked at the always indifferent Sophia, a bit surprised and shocked, then smiled brightly and said, "I've already spent 5 years on you. Why should I wait?" Sophia's heart trembled. She had been used to being in the dominant position between us, used to her high and mighty stance, thinking I would accept anything from her. She forgot that I said I would get tired too. I stood up, looked down at the dejected Sophia, and it seemed like our positions had reversed at that moment. The expectant, vulnerable one, longing for a bit of tenderness and care, had become Sophia. Her heart suddenly sank, feeling something was out of control, making her uneasy and lost. The next second I said, "Your response came too late. I no longer need it." This was like a sentence of execution. Sophia's eyes trembled and she immediately got up, trying to hold on to me. She said, "No, please." But before her hand could touch my sleeve, I took a step back, widening the gap between us, like a mote of fire that Sophia could no longer cross. I said, "Let's end it here, Sophia." I announced the final verdict, saying, "This is the best ending for us." Sophia wanted to say something more, but I turned around without hesitation, ready to leave. She almost frantically and tremblingly called out, "Sincere, you can't do this." Seeing my paused footsteps, she gathered herself and said, "Charlie is also my child. He can't be without a mother." As soon as she finished, I looked at her, my gaze filled with ridicule and sarcasm, making Sophia's heart freeze with embarrassment. Indeed, what right did she have to say such things? She was the one who didn't want Charlie to call her mom. At that moment, guilt and regret filled her chest. The sun had hidden behind the clouds at some point, and the autumn wind brought a biting cold, making the fallen leaves rustle as if mocking her belated realization. She stared at me, almost losing all strength, swaying as if she could barely stand. I looked at the deep guilt in her eyes, feeling indescribable. After a moment I said, "I won't block your calls anymore. If you want to see Charlie, just call me. As long as he is willing, I won't stop you from meeting him. Consider it my last kindness to you." After saying that, my gaze fell on Sophia's cold face, my eyes probing, not with reluctance, but as if looking through her at someone else. I was seeing the Sophia from college, the one I had loved throughout university, the one I had desperately wanted to get close to, the one I had given up everything for. But no, through those cold eyes, I could only see my own reflection. I suddenly understood something. Smiling with relief, I turned and left without hesitation. Sophia had always been indifferent and slow to react. Even if she was willing to accept me now, it was just out of habit. The one I had once loved so madly, who I had strived so hard for, was merely a figment of my imagination. I didn't look back, just felt the autumn wind blowing into my chest, feeling incredibly light-hearted. It was all over, that feeling which had lasted since our student days. The autumn wind had completely dissipated by the time I arrived at Victoria's house. It was already dark. I said, "Sorry I'm late." I offered an apologetic smile to Victoria, who opened the door while holding a sleeping Charlie. She shook her head and smiled gently, saying, "It's okay. I thanked her and was about to take Charlie, but he clung tightly to Victoria's collar. Feeling a bit embarrassed, I was about to wake Charlie to let go, but Victoria stopped me considerately. He just fell asleep. If we move him, he'll wake up again. Let him sleep here, she said. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Because of Sophie's sudden visit, Charlie hadn't slept well the previous night. He clung to my hand and frowned in his sleep. Now, seeing him sleep so peacefully in Victoria's arms, I sighed softly. Victoria noticed the relief on my face and guessed, "Did you resolve everything?" I nodded and said, "We talked it all out. Charlie and I will always be together and won't be separated." Victoria nodded lightly and suggested, "Stay here tonight. If Charlie wakes up and doesn't see you, he'll be anxious." Her gentle gaze fell on Charlie, paired with the warm light from the wall lamp behind her, making her look like a caring mother. As Victoria predicted, Charlie woke up several times that night, frightened by the unfamiliar surroundings. But each time he turned and saw me sleeping beside him, he felt reassured and nestled back into my arms to sleep again. In the morning, I woke up to find Charlie curled up in my arms, his small body pressing against my hand, sleeping sweetly like a baby. I chuckled softly but had to get up as my arm had gone numb. After washing up, I found Victoria already awake. "Good morning," she said, handing me a glass of milk. I replied with a smile, "Good morning," while massaging my arm. The warm touch of the milk surprised me. I smiled and said, "I've gotten used to drinking cold water since coming to the US." The warm milk flowed through my body, soothing me completely. Victoria noticed my discomfort and asked, "Is your arm uncomfortable?" Surprised by her keen observation, I didn't hide it and nodded. "It's a bit numb from being pressed all night." I was about to go into the kitchen to make breakfast for the kids when Victoria caught my wrist. I turned back puzzled and asked, "What's wrong?" Without answering, she placed her cool fingertips on my arm, massaging the numb areas precisely. Instinctively, I wanted to pull away, but her gentle yet firm voice said, "Don't move." The closeness of her command made me freeze. I wanted to say something, but Victoria increased the pressure, saying, "A massage will help with the blood circulation." Watching her focused look, I closed my mouth. The numbness gradually faded under her touch, and the tingling sensation made my ears burn. "It's better now," I quickly said. Victoria nodded, released my arm, and reminded me, "Don't let Charlie sleep on your arm all night again. It's very uncomfortable." I nodded, looking down. We were about to go to the kitchen when I noticed Isabella standing there, her golden hair shining, her eyes calm as she watched us. I felt awkward, although nothing had happened. Worried Isabella might misunderstand, I was about to explain when Victoria spoke first. "Bella, go wake up Charlie," she said. Isabella nodded and went to the guest room. I felt uneasy and asked Victoria, "Should we explain to Bella? I don't want her to misunderstand." Victoria, puzzled, asked, "Misunderstand what?" I hurriedly said, "Seeing her mother so close to another man. What if she overthinks it?" Victoria rarely frowned and said, "When did I say I was Bella's mother?" It wasn't until after breakfast that I realized, still in shock, that Victoria was Isabella's aunt. Isabella was quiet because she had witnessed her parents and brother perish in a fire. After experiencing PTSD, I found myself at a loss for words. It dawned on me that, despite spending so much time together, I had never asked about the relationship between Victoria and Isabella. I had always assumed they were mother and daughter, and had admired how Victoria managed everything alone without ever mentioning her partner. Realizing my mistake, I couldn't help but chuckle at my own foolishness. I was on my way home with Victoria, who was taking Isabella to her art class. It was convenient since we were heading in the same direction. When she saw me laugh, she asked what was so funny. I shook my head, keeping my earlier thoughts to myself, and casually commented on how well the kids were playing together. Isabella was skateboarding, glancing back at Charlie with sparkling eyes. Charlie, impressed by her skills, ran after her, asking her to teach him. Isabella steadied the skateboard for him, and once he was on, gave him a gentle push, making him think he was skating on his own. His joy was infectious, and I felt a warm glow watching them. Victoria followed my gaze and softened as she watched Isabella's lively demeanor. She had seen Isabella at her brother's funeral, where she had been a thin, cold figure, as lifeless as a piece of wood, indifferent to the people around her. Victoria had asked if Isabella wanted to come live with her in the United States, but Isabella had taken a long time to respond, eventually shaking her head. That was the first time Victoria saw an emotional response from Isabella, as tears suddenly streamed down her otherwise expressionless face. Victoria, heart aching, wiped her tears away, understanding that Isabella couldn't bear to leave. Victoria didn't force Isabella to come with her, instead arranging for relatives to take care of her and visiting every month despite her busy schedule. Last month, those relatives had twins and could no longer manage, so Victoria booked a flight to bring Isabella back. However, she couldn't fly herself, and the relatives were unwilling to make the journey, so she booked an unaccompanied minor ticket for Isabella. By sheer coincidence, Isabella met Charlie and me. Watching Isabella play happily with Charlie, Victoria smiled, relieved. She had been worried that Isabella would be lonely living with her, but now she felt reassured. As I snapped out of my reverie, I saw that the kids had stopped playing. We had reached my house. Isabella hugged her skateboard and waved goodbye to Charlie, while Victoria and I exchanged farewells. As soon as Charlie and I got home and took off our jackets, there was a knock at the door. Charlie wanted to open it, insisting, "It must be Bella, she misses me." I chuckled and stopped him, saying, "You just parted ways. Go wash your hands, I'll get the door." To my surprise, it was Sophia standing there in the same coat as before, with the suitcase by her side. "I'm going back home," she said. I was taken aback for a moment and then frowned. "Didn't I ask you to give me a heads up before coming?" I couldn't imagine how scared Charlie would be if he had opened the door. Trying to shield him, I called out, "Dad's picking up a package," before stepping outside and closing the door behind me. Sophia's hands tightened and then relaxed on her suitcase, a complex expression on her face. Her own son was so afraid of her. Sophia's heart trembled as she suppressed her bitterness. "Sorry. I was passing by on my way to the airport and thought I'd say goodbye. I'll notify you in advance next time." The cold, detached aura I remembered seemed shattered, replaced with an air of desolation. I nodded and said, "Safe travels." Where Sophia went didn't concern me anymore. I turned to go back inside, but Sophia's voice stopped me, her tone pained. "Will you ever return home?" I paused, looking at her. Despite her hopeful gaze, I nodded. "This is a foreign land to me. Of course, I'll eventually go back." Her eyes lit up with hope, but I quickly added, "Even if I return, it won't necessarily be to our hometown." Sophia's face fell for a moment, but she remained hopeful. "No matter where you are, I'll wait for you to come back." I frowned, about to say something, but Charlie's voice interrupted from inside. "Dad, what did you buy?" I swallowed my words, gave Sophia a final glance, and said, "Safe travels," before firmly closing the door. Sophia, watching the door shut unceremoniously, seemed to regain some of her former strength, shaking off her earlier fatigue. A glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes. As long as I return, she will have hope. Inside the room, unaware of her feelings, I spread my hands and said to Charlie, "I didn't buy anything." The delivery knocked on the wrong door. Charlie wrinkled his little face and said, "I thought it was the Lego. I wanted to build it with Bella tonight." Watching his disappointed and annoyed expression, I found it extremely cute. I smiled and coaxed, "We'll build the Lego when it arrives tomorrow. Tonight, let's go ride the Ferris wheel with Bella, okay?" It was a newly built Ferris wheel nearby with a fireworks show at night. Charlie had been talking about wanting to go for a while. Hearing this, he instantly nodded and said, "Okay." In the evening, Victoria and I stopped in front of the brightly lit, bustling amusement park. I stared at the long line for the Ferris wheel and sighed, "So many people." After living here for almost a month, it was my first time seeing so many people in this neighborhood. I didn't like crowded places, especially noisy ones. Suddenly, I regretted coming and thought about taking the kids back another time. But Victoria grabbed my arm and said, "It's okay, the line moves quickly. It'll be fine after a short wait. Looking into her gentle eyes, I hesitated for a moment before Charlie tugged at my coat. He said, "Dad, I want to play." I looked down to see 2 pairs of eager eyes staring straight at me. Unable to refuse, I sighed and agreed. "All right." Charlie immediately beamed, rubbing his face against my hand and acting spoiled. "Dad, you're the best." Seeing this, I could only smile and pinch his chubby cheeks, saying, "You really know how to make me happy." Victoria watched me under the dim lights, her smile serene and eyes clear. She couldn't help but smile as well, tucking her hair behind her ear. She then met Isabella's knowing gaze. Victoria paused for a moment before seeing Bella look at me, then at her, nodding in approval and casually looking away, as if acknowledging Victoria's choice. Victoria couldn't help but laugh, ruffling Isabella's blonde hair without saying a word. This little girl was getting involved in her business. The line did move quickly, and in half an hour we were on the Ferris wheel. The cabin slowly ascended. Charlie and Isabella sat together while Victoria and I sat opposite them. Although it wasn't Charlie's first time on a Ferris wheel, it was his first time seeing Boston's nightscape. He pressed against the window, eyes filled with wonder as he looked outside. The night was dark, with the bright moon casting a silver glow over everything. Not far away, the bustling city was illuminated, with towering buildings creating a dazzling sight. Charlie couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Isabella also looked outside, gazing at the moon thoughtfully. Watching the kids' delighted expressions, I smiled and turned to Victoria. In an instant, I noticed something was wrong. Victoria's lips were pale, and she tightly gripped the safety belt at her waist. Despite her usual gentle smile, her body was stiff, and she deliberately avoided the windows, staring straight ahead as if we were sitting on a high wire instead of a Ferris wheel cabin. I leaned closer to Victoria and asked softly, "Are you afraid of heights?" Victoria glanced at me quickly, then lowered her head and said, "A little." Only then did I remember why she was so worried about Isabella yet still let her fly alone. Feeling guilty, I said, "My fault. I shouldn't have made you come if I knew you were afraid." Victoria took a deep breath, smiled gently and said, "It's okay. I underestimated the Ferris wheel and overestimated myself." As she spoke, she took a deep breath to calm her nerves. Then I removed her glasses and asked, "Would it help if you couldn't see clearly?" Being so close, my presence made Victoria feel dizzy. She didn't answer my question, but I saw her face flush slightly, thinking it worked. I smiled and was about to guide her through deep breaths when the cabin suddenly jolted to a stop at the highest point. All 4 of us were startled. Victoria's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively grabbed my hand. Charlie shouted, "Dad, the lights went out below. Is it a power outage?" Victoria tightened her grip on my hand. I quickly reassured her, "No, it's for the fireworks." Before I could finish, a firework shot into the sky, followed by the sound of it bursting outside the window. Charlie exclaimed, "It's fireworks!" More fireworks followed, lighting up the night sky with their captivating brilliance. Charlie eagerly pressed against the window, his eyes full of joy. He pulled Isabella close and, with hands clasped, made a wish, saying, "Wishes made under fireworks are the most likely to come true. Let's make a wish together." Isabella, seeing Charlie's excitement, hesitated for a moment before closing her eyes to make a wish. I didn't know what she wished for, but when she opened her eyes, there was a hint of sorrow in them. I didn't have time to worry about the kids' wishes, focusing instead on the person next to me. I held Victoria's hand tightly, as if to give her comfort and strength. I helped her take deep breaths and tried to distract her by pointing at the fireworks outside the window. "Look, fireworks, aren't they beautiful?" I said, realizing her glasses were still in my hand. I quickly retrieved them, saying, "Sorry, I forgot that Victoria's glasses were still with me. She mustn't be able to see clearly. I'll give them to her. I can see." Victoria stopped me, a playful smile on her lips. She leaned in and whispered in my ear, "I'm not nearsighted. These glasses are for blocking blue light." As soon as she finished speaking, I felt my ears burning red. I bit my lip awkwardly and said, "Ha ha, I thought you were nearsighted." Victoria looked at my shy expression and quickly stopped smiling. She gazed at me warmly and said softly, "It's okay." Her gentle words, accompanied by her warm breath on my neck, made me feel comforted. I turned to look into her deep eyes, which were no longer obscured by the glasses. I noticed a tiny, barely noticeable mole beneath her eye. The fireworks reflected in her eyes, resembling a sky full of twinkling stars, captivatingly beautiful. I was almost lost in Victoria's gaze, the sound of fireworks fading away, leaving just the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. It wasn't until Charlie called out, "Dad, you and Aunt Victoria should make a wish too," that I snapped back to reality. I looked at Charlie's eager face, quickly let go of Victoria's hand, turned to the window to watch the fireworks, and closed my eyes instinctively. I don't remember what I wished for, but Victoria's gentle eyes filled my mind, accompanied by the loud thumping of my heart. When the fireworks ended, I returned to normal. The Ferris wheel slowly descended, and Victoria seemed much calmer, not as scared anymore. However, I didn't dare to look her in the eyes, lost in my thoughts. An awkward atmosphere lingered between us, or maybe it was just me feeling awkward. Victoria appeared unfazed. We played with the kids nearby for a while. Charlie was so tired that he fell asleep in Victoria's arms on the way back. Isabella was also tired, obediently walking home with us. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, lighting our path. The streetlights illuminated the way home. The night was quiet, with only the sound of leaves rustling under our feet, eerily silent, almost torturous. The silence reminded me of the moments on the Ferris wheel, and I bit my lip, wanting to say something. But Victoria spoke first. "Christmas is coming. How about going to Iceland to see the Northern Lights?" I was taken aback looking at Victoria, my eyes filled with surprise and confusion. "Why did you suddenly bring this up?" I asked. Anyone would be surprised to hear about a trip a month later while walking home from a Ferris wheel ride. Victoria saw my puzzled expression and smiled apologetically. It just came to mind suddenly. She looked at Sincere, and in the dim light of street lamps and moonlight, her bright, watery eyes reminded her of the fireworks on the Ferris wheel. The dazzling fireworks not only reflected in her deep eyes, but also illuminated me making a wish. My face was hidden in the shadows, making it difficult to see my expression. The next second, fireworks exploded, colorful lights brightening my face, like someone who had been colorblind all their life seeing a full-color world for the first time. Victoria's eyes brightened, her heart fluttering. She lowered her eyelashes, a shy blush spreading from her eyes to her ears. Her brows relaxed, exuding a sacred aura that made one not dare to offend. After getting off the Ferris wheel and seeing me still lost in thought, she thought of the Northern Lights. It said that wishes made under the Northern Lights are granted by the universe. Victoria smiled, looking at me. "I guess you'll like it." I couldn't help but smile back at her confident grin. After laughing, I nodded and said, "Yes, I've always wanted to see the Northern Lights." I thought of my parents. After I got into college, they left their jobs at the hospital to become Doctors Without Borders. On my 20th birthday, they sent a video from under the Northern Lights in Iceland, singing "Happy Birthday" to me. The quiet night and ice fields, with the splendid, dreamlike Northern Lights, felt like the Milky Way had descended to Earth. Since then, I've wanted to see the Northern Lights in person, but with my studies, then having a child, and working hard alongside Sophia, I never got the chance. Now, hearing Victoria's invitation, I didn't hesitate and nodded. "Yes, let's take Charlie and Bella to see the Northern Lights during the Christmas holidays." Victoria smiled warmly, the night serene, moonlight spreading a gentle warmth. Isabella glanced at us thoughtfully and turned her head. The autumn wind blew away the leaves, and soon snow began to fall. The Christmas holidays arrived as expected. With Christmas and New Year so close, the holidays were combined, giving us 2 weeks to enjoy Iceland. I looked at Charlie, all geared up, and worriedly fixed his clothes, reminding him, "Make sure to hold Bella's hand. If you get lost or need help, find someone in uniform, got it?" Charlie nodded, glancing at Isabella beside him, and solemnly said, "Don't worry, Dad. I will be as brave as Bella and not be afraid to fly alone. I sighed, looking at the two little ones, feeling a myriad of helplessness. What should have been a pleasant trip turned into a fuss because Charlie insisted on flying alone, just like Isabella did last time. He refused to let us accompany him, saying, "I'm grown up now, I want to be as brave as Bella." We eventually agreed to let Isabella accompany him. Naturally, I was worried, but looking at their determined eyes, I couldn't say no. So Victoria and I booked an earlier flight. We would fly first and they would take the next flight. As the boarding announcement for our flight came on, Victoria and I got ready to board. I still wanted to give some instructions when Isabella wrote a few words in my palm. She wrote, "I will take good care of Charlie, don't worry." I looked into her calm eyes filled with determination. It felt like she was assuring me not only for this trip but also to make up for something else. I thought of something and stopped nagging. I gently patted her head and said, "I believe in you." Victoria also instructed Isabella, "Hold your brother's hand tightly, don't get lost. We'll meet at the exit after the flight." She then tucked an asthma inhaler into Isabella's pocket just in case. Isabella nodded silently, looking at us. I thought she was urging us to board quickly. Just as Victoria and I were about to leave, Isabella tilted her head and glanced at me, making a few hand gestures to Victoria. Victoria looked momentarily puzzled, then smiled helplessly and patted her head. She said something in German. The hand gesture was complex, but I distinctly heard the German phrase, which seemed to be a nickname for a mischievous child. Just as I was feeling puzzled, the boarding announcement sounded again, urging us to board. Charlie waved and said, "Dad, you go ahead. I can take good care of Bella and myself." He was a head shorter than Isabella but spoke with such confidence that it made me laugh. I tapped his nose and said, "Just take care of yourself, you're not even half her size." With that, I felt a bit more at ease and bid them goodbye, turning towards the boarding gate. On the plane, I suddenly remembered what Isabella had gestured earlier and couldn't help but ask Victoria, "What did Bella say to you just now?" Victoria saw the confusion in my eyes. She seemed to ponder for a moment before saying, "She knows I'm afraid of heights. She asked you to take good care of me." My attention was immediately diverted. Seeing her expression, I asked nervously, "Are you okay now?" Before we departed, I had asked Victoria about her fear of heights. She had smiled and said, "As long as I'm not near the window, it's not a big deal." Her vague response made me dubious, and now I was even more anxious. Seeing my worried expression, Victoria felt a warmth in her heart. She initially wanted to say she was fine, but after adjusting her glasses, she looked up with a hint of vulnerability and said, "I'm fine now, just a bit scared of takeoff and landing." I immediately frowned. Takeoff and landing are when the sensation of weightlessness is strongest, which is indeed the scariest for those afraid of heights. I hesitated for a moment, then moved closer to her. Victoria watched me approach and jokingly asked, "Are you going to take off my glasses again this time?" I paused, feeling somewhat helpless. "No," I replied, thinking of the embarrassing incident on the Ferris wheel last time. I felt extremely awkward, so I glanced at her and said, "Do you want to feel better or not?" This sounded more like shyness than annoyance. Victoria wasn't upset at all. She lightly nodded and coaxed me, saying, "Please, Dr. Stephen, guide me." Her voice was gentle, with a hint of amusement that made my ears turn red. But the plane had already started taxiing. I quickly took out the flight earplugs and said, "Use these. They will reduce the discomfort in your eardrums." As the plane taxied faster, I sped up my speech. "You can also tense your abdominal and leg muscles during takeoff to alleviate the feeling of weightlessness. If it gets too uncomfortable, just talk to me to distract yourself." Before I could finish, Victoria gently held my hand, her warm touch reassuring me. She said, "This is the most effective." As the plane took off, my heart felt as if it was plunging. When we arrived at Keflavik Airport, Victoria and I had already collected our checked luggage and found our down jackets, sitting by the exit waiting for Charlie and Isabella. Victoria looked at me wearing gloves, puzzled. "Aren't you hot?" The central heating in the airport was so high that it made people drowsy, Some foreigners were even wearing short sleeves. I pursed my lips, awkwardly smiled, and took off the gloves, saying, "I don't know why I put them on." Victoria could tell I was lying but didn't expose me. She just nodded as if she hadn't noticed. I looked at my hands, feeling lost. Even though we had been off the plane for a while, it felt as if Victoria's touch was still there, warm, firm, with a faint scent of floral perfume that threw my heart into chaos. I sneaked a glance at Victoria, seeing her calm demeanor, and felt I was overthinking. Victoria happened to look over, and I quickly averted my gaze. An inexplicable tension filled the air between us. Until the two children caught up with us, Charlie said, "Dad, Sister didn't have an asthma attack. I took good care of her, right?" Charlie's eyes lit up as soon as he saw us. His voice, seeking praise, reached us before he did. I squatted down with a smile, took his small backpack and praised, "Charlie, you did a great job." Then I patted Isabella's head and said, "Bella did great too, taking such good care of your brother. Well done." Isabella's eyes shimmered and she nodded shyly, looking away. Charlie, still excited, chattered on, "The older sisters all praised me, saying I was awesome." I nodded, watching his lively demeanor, and felt a weight lift off my heart. It had been a long time since Charlie had been this happy. Just then, Victoria said, "The owner of the guest house is here to pick us up. Let's go." Everyone nodded, changed their clothes, and headed outside. We were staying at a guest house 30 kilometers from Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. The owner, a local Icelander with typical Nordic features, greeted us politely and helped with our luggage. His English was broken but understandable. Knowing we were there to see the Northern Lights for Christmas, he enthusiastically recommended his sister. "Olivia is an experienced Northern Lights hunter. She's guided many people to see the lights," he said. Victoria and I exchanged glances, knowing we had found the right person. Watching the Northern Lights requires a lot of luck, and having an experienced guide would be greatly beneficial. I couldn't wait to meet Olivia. As I was thinking this, the owner looked at us through the rearview mirror and said, "According to Icelandic legend, lovers who see the Northern Lights together are blessed by the gods and will be happy for life." His words left me stunned. I awkwardly looked away, only to meet Victoria's smiling eyes. She raised an eyebrow, and in the shadowy car her eyes were piercingly bright. Her gaze burned into my heart, making me suddenly recall our previous moments on the Ferris wheel and in the airplane. The mix of excitement and embarrassment surged up again. I almost fled from her gaze, biting my lip, just about to explain when Victoria said, "It's a very romantic legend." She neither confirmed nor denied it, as if she didn't understand the owner's meaning, and skillfully changed the topic. "We'd like to ask Olivia to take us to see the Northern Lights. Does she have time?" The man turning the steering wheel said, "I'm not sure, but her house is next to the guest house. You can ask her later." We reached the guest house smoothly. Victoria wanted to help with the luggage, but I stopped her with a smile. "I can handle it. You take the kids inside to rest and adjust to the time difference." Victoria looked at the two children, who were so tired they could barely keep their eyes open, and nodded. She took them upstairs to wash up and put them to bed. Icelanders seemed to have a natural ability to perceive romance. Even though the owner couldn't understand our conversation, he could sense our closeness. He murmured in Icelandic, "A happy family." Victoria happened to hear and couldn't help but smile, replying in Icelandic, "Thank you." The owner was somewhat surprised. Seeing our Asian faces, he had instinctively used English, not expecting her to understand Icelandic. Victoria explained, "I once lived in Iceland with my parents for a while. They fell in love under the Northern Lights." She looked at the surrounding snowy landscape and bright sky, took a deep breath of the cold air, and the sharp chill awakened her childhood memories. She remembered, under the Northern Lights, sitting around a campfire in a tent with her family. Her mother told stories and played the harmonica. It was warm and nostalgic. Victoria looked up at the lights in the guest house's second floor, as if seeing her childhood home, and smiled gently. After a day of rest, we donned our gear and at 3 a.m. got into Olivia's car. Olivia was a tall, robust woman, only slightly shorter than me. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, and a few wrinkles at the corners of her eyes showed her age, but her eyes remained sharp. She spoke concisely. "The weather's been good lately, so it should be easier to see the northern lights." As she drove, she checked the satellite and cloud maps, constantly adjusting our direction. The night was deep and dark, like dense fog swallowing the car. The only safe place was the ice field illuminated by the car's headlights, with the jagged outlines of distant snow-capped mountains vaguely visible. I marveled at nature's craftsmanship, but also worried about the kids. I turned to check if Charlie was cold or scared, only to see him excitedly pressed against the window, looking out. Despite seeing almost nothing, he remained undeterred. He asked Olivia, "How much longer?" Olivia glanced at him, turned the wheel, and stepped on the gas. Half an hour. Half an hour later, we reached the first observation point, only to be told that the wind direction had changed, and the chances of seeing the northern lights there were slim. After trying 2 more locations, by the time we reached the third observation point, everyone had lost hope of seeing the lights. The wind on the ice field was sharp and biting. I let Charlie and Isabella stay in the car while Victoria and I got out. The sky was pitch black, with only the stars twinkling, making one feel lonely. I breathed into my hands and rubbed them together to keep warm. Looking up at the direction where the aurora might appear, my eyes were filled with melancholy. The aurora is something that one can only encounter by chance, and I probably wouldn't see it this time. Just as I was thinking this, a rich aroma suddenly wafted from beside me. Turning my head, I saw Victoria handing me a cup of hot cocoa. She said, "Drink something warm to warm up your body." I thanked her and took the cup. With one sip, warmth spread through my entire body. Victoria noticed my disappointment and comforted me, saying, "You will definitely see the aurora." I took it as mere consolation, smiled, and looked down, saying, "Even Olivia said it's not certain. How can you be so sure?" She replied, "Because you're here." Victoria's voice was gentle, causing a tremor in my heart. I looked at Victoria in a daze and saw deep, intense love in her profound eyes, like a myriad of stars. Just as I was about to say something, Charlie and Isabella came running over. Charlie shouted, the aurora has appeared." The blue-green light of the aurora spread across the sky like an artist's brushstrokes, adorned with a few dazzling stars. The mesmerizing light and stars spread across the horizon, captivating everyone's gaze. I stared at the colorful aurora, my eyes full of fascination. It felt as if I could see the end of the world, catching a glimpse of the universe's vastness and magnificence. The scenery was so beautiful that I was engrossed in it, not noticing Victoria beside me. Her eyes were burning with intensity. The aurora was a sight for sincere. But Victoria's sight was sincere. Under the starry sky, his eyes seemed to contain the universe, making it impossible to look away, until a slightly hoarse voice called out, snapping us back to reality. "Mom!" It was Isabella. Charlie was the first to hear it, looking in surprise at Isabella, who was gazing at the aurora. He asked, "Bella, you can speak?" With Charlie's exclamation, Victoria and I quickly gathered around. My eyes were full of shock. I knew Isabella's muteness was due to trauma, but I didn't know it was related to the aurora. Just as I was about to say something, a cold wind blew past, and the next second, Isabella started coughing violently. Her chest heaved and her face turned crimson. The feeling of suffocation surged up, but she still stared at the aurora, unwilling to look away. I was stunned for a second, then realized it was an asthma attack. I wanted to rush to the car to get the asthma medication, but Victoria seemed to have anticipated this. She quickly approached, took out a spray from her pocket, and administered it to Isabella. She said, "Take a deep breath," holding Isabella's head steady to prevent struggling while gently reminding her to breathe calmly. Charlie and I stood in front of her, shielding her from the biting cold wind of the ice field. I explained to Olivia, who had come over anxiously, the asthma attack was triggered by the cold air. Olivia nodded, not only blocking the wind but also handing her hot water. Isabella took it, drank a sip, and finally calmed down. Her breathing was steady, and except for a slight redness in her ears, there was no sign of her earlier distress. Charlie, curious and happy, said to Isabella, "Bella, your voice is so nice." His clear eyes were full of innocent kindness, warming Isabella's heart. She pursed her lips and said, "Thank you, Charlie." It was a good thing that Isabella could speak again. Watching Charlie jumping around excitedly, I smiled broadly. I remembered before we set out, Victoria had said that this trip to see the aurora was also to stimulate Isabella. Her parents and brother had died in a fire while watching the aurora, and Isabella had survived because she was out. The aurora had always been a hurdle in her heart. Seeing it and moving past it meant she could speak again. It seemed our goal had been achieved. As I thought about this, I unconsciously turned to look for Victoria, only to fall into her deep, bright eyes. Without her glasses, her eyes were captivatingly beautiful, making it hard for me to look away. Just as I was about to say something, Victoria put a finger to her lips, signaling for silence, then glanced at her phone. I was puzzled. The next second, Victoria looked up at me, her smile radiant and sincere. She said, "Merry Christmas, Sincere. Happy birthday." The starry sky was her backdrop, and through her eyes I saw the aurora, the snowy mountains, and myself. It took me a while to come back to my senses. Just as I was about to say something, my phone rang. I instinctively picked it up and saw it was Sophia. I hesitated for a moment, smiled apologetically at Victoria, and then turned to answer the call. Since our last parting, Sophia had called a few times. Charlie knew she wouldn't take him away, so he wasn't afraid of her calls anymore, though he didn't say much, often ending the calls quickly. I rarely chatted with her either, usually passing the phone to Charlie after a few words. Now, her sudden call made me think something important must have come up. The first thing she said was a low, "Happy birthday, Sincere." Her voice was clear but carried an unmistakable fatigue, and in the background I could hear the bustle of the hospital. I immediately realized she must have been working non-stop and had timed her call on purpose. Even after hanging up, she probably had surgery or a meeting to attend. My heart trembled suddenly. A call from across the ocean, in the middle of the night, just to wish me happiness. If it were before, I would have been deeply moved. After all, in those past years, Sophia had never spent a birthday with me. Now, however, I felt nothing but calm. I could even absurdly think that Sophia actually knew my birthday. I looked up and gave a self-mocking smile. But when I spoke, my tone was distant yet polite. I said, "Thank you for remembering." She replied, "It's no trouble." Sophia's voice was almost eager. Her guilt and regret were never concealed, and her kindness towards me and our child was genuine. Sophia didn't even hope for reconciliation. She just wanted to do her best to be good to Sincere, to make up for all those lost years. But I didn't give her the chance. I said, "If there's nothing else, I'll hang up now." She said, "Wait." After a moment's pause, she continued, "I bought gifts for you and Charlie. Can you accept them?" I answered truthfully, "We're on vacation. We won't be back until after New Year's." I was about to hang up when I heard her voice tremble. She said, "It's been a long time since we talked. Don't you have anything you want to ask me?" Her tone was calm, but I could detect a hint of pleading. I frowned. I had no feelings for her anymore. I said, "I'm not interested in your matters." Fearing she might misunderstand, I reiterated, "The only connection between us is our child. Just care for him. There's no need to worry about me." There was a silence on the other end, only the sound of the wind whistling in my ear. Just when I thought she wouldn't speak and was about to hang up, I heard a soft, trembling question. "Do you have someone you like?" My breath caught. For some reason, Victoria came to mind, her eyes sparkling under the fireworks in Aurora. I was stunned for a moment and didn't answer directly, just hung up the phone. Olivia said, "The aurora is fading, we should go." I came back to my senses, looking up at the gradually disappearing northern lights. The desolate night outlined the distant mountains, and the biting wind blew away the heaviness in my heart. I remembered a video my parents sent me when I was 20. Under the northern lights, they made a wish for their son to have the freedom to love and to reject love, to always be carefree and without regrets. In the icy cold, my thoughts had never been so clear. I looked at Victoria beside me, feeling a warmth in my heart. Even Charlie knew it was my birthday. Regretting I didn't make a wish under the aurora, I smiled and said, "No need for wishes, the most important one has already come true." Hearing this, Victoria's heart suddenly brightened for some reason. Back at the lodge, the two children were already asleep. The sky was lightening, and Reykjavik's night was giving way to day. I looked at their peaceful, sleeping faces, feeling a sense of relief. I drew the curtains for them and turned to leave, only to be embraced by a warm, citrus-scented figure. Victoria's eyes were gentle. She opened her hand in front of me, revealing a diamond-encrusted watch. I was stunned for a moment and heard her pleasant voice. "This is your birthday gift. I didn't get to give it to you earlier." Victoria still wasn't wearing her glasses, her slightly upturned eyes intently watching me, sparkling like stars. I was momentarily at a loss, unsure if it was because of the diamond or Victoria. The diamond seemed like the brightest star, reminding me of the fireworks in the aurora. I hesitated, thinking it was too expensive, and was about to refuse when Victoria said, "Don't feel burdened. It's my gift to you. I just want you to be happy." Looking at her gentle eyes, I felt a surge of warmth and smiled. "All right, I'll accept it." I reached out to take it, but then paused. I pursed my lips and suddenly said, "Can you put it on for me?" Victoria was taken aback. She didn't expect me to make such a request. After all, she had always been the more proactive one in our relationship, and I had always been polite and distant. She even worried that her words under the aurora might have scared me. Now, my request seemed like a sign. Victoria's heart trembled. She felt she might be close to the answer she wanted. Seeing me extend my arm, her eyes flickered. She suppressed her excitement, her hand steady like a surgeon's on the operating table. Moving closer, she reached around my arm to put on the watch. The proximity was overwhelming. Victoria had always thought she was the active one, trying to draw Sincere closer, hoping he would like her. But now, with just a hint of closeness from him, her hand trembled, almost unable to handle it. The faint woody scent around me seemed to draw her in, tempting her to get lost in it. All this happened in an instant. Her mind might be in turmoil, but her hands were swift and steady. She quickly fastened the watch and stepped back, catching a glimpse of Sincere's red ears. She paused, unable to hold back a laugh. "Your ears are red." I was startled, feeling the heat spread to my face. I pursed my lips. I glanced at her and said, "It's because I like you that my ears turned red." Victoria was so shocked by the word "like" that her eyes widened, and she seemed to lose her train of thought. After a few seconds, she finally realized and said, "Like?" I was used to seeing her calm and composed demeanor, and this was the first time I saw her so slow to respond. She seemed so genuinely herself, and I found it adorable. I couldn't help but lean in and plant a kiss on the corner of her lips. "I like you," I said. Just as I was about to pull away, I felt a pair of arms wrap around my waist, and the sensation on my lips became even more pronounced as she parted my lips with hers. After a deep kiss, we were both breathless as we reluctantly separated. Victoria's eyes were tinged with a shy red, her lips moist and inviting for another kiss. My gaze darkened as I pressed my forehead against hers, gently rubbing her nose. She softly said, "I love you." Outside, the snow was 3 feet deep, and the cold wind swept across the icy plains. Inside, it was as warm as spring. Lovers exchanged a kiss. In adult relationships, things move slowly during the ambiguous phase, but once feelings are confirmed, everything falls into place like dry wood catching fire. After a trip to Iceland, the 4 of us returned home. The 2 kids had adjusted well, and as soon as we got home, Charlie ran up to me smiling and asked, "Dad, should I start calling Aunt Victoria Mom now?" I felt a bit helpless. Seeing his twinkling eyes, I knew he was doing it on purpose. I wanted to grab his little ear and give him a playful scolding, but just as I reached out, the doorbell rang. Victoria quickly protected Charlie and said, "Charlie was just joking. You go answer the door, I'll talk to him." So I retracted my hand, let Charlie go, and went to open the door. To my surprise, it was someone unexpected, Sophie. I was stunned for a moment, not knowing why she was here. Just as I was about to ask, I felt warmth behind me. It was Victoria, who had come up and casually wrapped her arm around mine, standing intimately by my side. At a glance, Sophie's expression changed. "We're together now," Victoria said. Sophie looked at the two of us, exchanging a glance, and her heart sank. The exhaustion from back-to-back transatlantic flights to make up for vacation time was nothing compared to the pain this simple act caused her. It felt like her heart was being squeezed, a sour and aching sensation filling her chest. All the previous breakups hadn't crushed her spirit, but now she truly realized that I had moved on. She was the one left behind. Sophie's heart felt as if it were being sliced apart. Seeing my surprised eyes, she swallowed her words and took out a gift box from her bag. "This is your birthday present," she said. A surgeon's hands are always steady, but now they trembled as if the gift was harder to handle than heart surgery. I glanced at her and accepted the gift, seeing she had nothing more to say. Unable to hold back, I asked, "Is there anything else?" Sophie hesitated for a moment, then, as if recalling something, replied, "Ethan is engaged to a college classmate. The wedding is in March. If you have time, you're invited to the wedding." I was taken aback, then nodded and said, "I see." After a brief hesitation, I asked, "Should I call Charlie over so you can?" She interrupted. "No need." Sophie pursed her lips, picked up her bag, and said, "There'll be another chance. I have work to do and can't stay long." With that, she turned and left, leaving Victoria and me to watch her back in silence, puzzled. She had crossed 8 time zones and taken a long flight just to deliver a gift. Victoria, seeing her suddenly weary figure, naturally understood why she left in such a hurry. She adjusted her glasses, closed the door, and said, "Forget about her. We haven't unpacked yet." She gently kissed my lips, pulled me to the living room, and said, "Let's unpack, then we'll go have dinner at that Chinese restaurant and celebrate your birthday." Charlie and Bella chimed in, "Okay." Before I could say anything, the 2 kids eagerly agreed. Looking at the cheerfully smiling Bella and the beaming Charlie, I couldn't help but laugh. No one expected that such warm scenes would become our daily routine. Until the day I graduated from Harvard Medical School, I knelt on one knee, and amidst the flowers and envious looks, Victoria said, "I do." Everything fell into place. Bella tilted her head and called me uncle, while Charlie didn't hesitate to jump into Victoria's arms, shouting, "Mom!" Watching Charlie's excited face, I smiled tenderly. Victoria saw it, walked over quickly, and hugged me, saying, "Mr. Sincere, I will love you forever." The last time she said this was in the icy fields of Iceland. This time, it was under the bright sunshine of Boston. Without hesitation, I hugged her back and said, "I love you too." Bella lowered her eyes and gently covered Charlie's eyes. In the long daylight, under the warm sunshine, we shared a lingering kiss,